For 3 centuries, humanity served as the galaxy's emergency responders, protectors, and problem solvers, asking only to be treated as equals in return. But when the Galactic Council finally revealed that it would never grant them true respect, humanity made a decision that would change the fate of the cosmos forever. They walked away. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The vast amphitheater of the Galactic Council stretched across kilometers of polished crystalline surfaces, its tiered seating filled with thousands of alien representatives. Their varied forms created a living tapestry of colors and shapes. The tall, ethereal Zephyrians with their translucent wings, the bulky Cromneri encased in their environmental suits, the graceful aquatic Nelthans floating in their mobility spheres. At the center of this cosmic assembly, a small delegation of humans sat in stark isolation, 5 individuals representing the entirety of humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, a weathered woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, stood at the central podium. Her voice carried across the chamber with the practiced authority of someone who had spent decades mediating conflicts between species that couldn't even breathe the same atmosphere. But today, her words would carry a different weight entirely. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, she began, her tone measured and formal, we come before you today not to request aid, not to seek arbitration, but to inform you of humanity's decision. After careful deliberation spanning months of debate within our government, we are formally withdrawing from all galactic affairs, effective immediately. A ripple of shocked chittering, humming, and various forms of alien communication swept through the assembly like a wave. The Cromneri delegates' breathing apparatus hissed loudly in distress, while several Zephyrians' wings began beating frantically, a sign of extreme agitation in their species. The Council Chancellor, ancient Valdorian, whose tree-like form had grown root tendrils deep into the chamber floor over his centuries of service, raised one massive branch arm for silence. His voice resonated with the deep, woody tones that commanded respect across 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Vasquez, the Chancellor intoned, surely you cannot be serious. Humanity has been integral to galactic civilization for over 3 centuries. Your species has prevented 17 major wars, solved the Andromeda resource crisis, and pioneered the translation protocols that allow this very assembly to function. What could possibly drive you to such a drastic decision? Elena's expression remained impassive, but those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the only sign of the pain this moment caused her. She had given her entire life to galactic diplomacy, believing in the dream of peaceful cooperation among the stars. Now she was about to burn it all down. Chancellor Maltharius, esteemed delegates, she continued, for 300 years, humanity has served as the galaxy's emergency responders. When the Thessarian Empire threatened to glass the Centauri colonies, who negotiated the peace? When the Great Plague threatened to wipe out 6 species in the Outer Rim, who developed the cure and distributed it freely? When the Void Wraiths emerged from dark space, who stood at the front lines while others debated territorial boundaries? The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew the answers to her rhetorical questions. It had always been humanity eager to help, quick to sacrifice, first to volunteer for the dangerous missions that others deemed too costly or too risky. And how has the galaxy repaid this service? Elena's voice began to carry an edge now. 3 centuries of accumulated grievances bleeding through her diplomatic composure. When Earth requested support for our colony ship programs, we were denied. When we asked for backup during the Titan mining rebellion, we were told it was an internal human matter. When our researchers requested access to the ancient archive to study faster than light communication, we were deemed too young a species to handle such knowledge. The Nelthan's representative, floating in her sphere of synthetic seawater, spoke up with the melodic tones of her people. But Ambassador, surely you understand the protocols exist for good reason. The galaxy must be managed carefully, with wisdom earned through millennia of bureaucracy. Elena cut her off. abandoning all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. Millennia of committees that meet to form committees that debate whether to meet. While you deliberated about providing aid to the refugee crisis in the Kessler system, human ships were already there, evacuating survivors, while you spent 5 years arguing about mining rights in the asteroid belt. Human engineers solved the energy shortage by developing fusion cores that we then shared freely with everyone. Dr. Marcus Chen, the lead scientist in the human delegation, stood up beside Elena. His usually calm demeanor showed cracks of frustration that had been building for decades. We shared our medical advances, our agricultural techniques, our manufacturing processes. We asked for nothing in return except to be treated as equals in this galactic community. Instead, we were treated as the galaxy's maintenance crew, useful when something needed fixing, ignored when it came time to make real decisions. The Cromnery delegate's translator crackled to life, his mechanical voice filled with indignation. This is preposterous. Humanity has always been respected, always been respected. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the military liaison, laughed bitterly as she rose from her seat. Her scarred face told the story of a dozen conflicts fought on behalf of species that now sat comfortably in these chambers. When the hegemony wars erupted, who fought and died in the trenches while the council debated rules of engagement? Humans. When the pirates in the frontier zones needed to be stopped, who took the casualties while others worried about their trade routes? Humans. We've bled for this galaxy, and in return, we get lectures about patience and protocol, the truth of her words hung heavy in the air. Every major conflict of the past 3 centuries had seen human blood spilled while other species contributed resources, advisors, or strategic support from the safety of their home systems. Humanity had become the galaxy's sword and shield, expected to fight and die for causes that others deemed important, but not important enough to risk their own people. Elena took control of the moment again, her voice returning to its formal cadence. 3 months ago, humanity made a final request of this council. We asked for the recognition of equal voting rights in galactic decisions, commensurate with our contributions to galactic security and prosperity. We asked for shared access to advanced technologies that could benefit all species. We asked to be treated as partners rather than junior members in this community. Chancellor Malthurius shifted uncomfortably, his witty exterior creaking with the sound of old timber. Ambassador, these matters require careful consideration. The protocols that govern such decisions have been established for the request was denied. Elena continued, her words cutting through his explanation like a blade. Denied by a vote of 1,847 to 1. Only humanity voted in favor of treating humanity as an equal partner in the civilization we helped build and protect. The silence that followed was deafening. The reality of that vote hung over the chamber like a shroud. Nearly 2,000 species had looked at humanity's centuries of service, sacrifice, and contribution, and declared it insufficient to earn basic equality. So today, Elena said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, we inform you that humanity is done. Done fighting your wars while being excluded from decisions about peace. Done solving your crises while being denied the tools to solve our own problems. Done being the galaxy's servant while being treated as its child. Dr. Chen activated a holographic display that showed star charts spanning the galaxy. Red dots began appearing, hundreds, then thousands of them. These represent every human colony, research station, military outpost, and diplomatic mission in galactic space. As of this moment, they are all being recalled to human-controlled systems. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Human infrastructure was woven into the fabric of galactic civilization. Human-designed hyperspace beacons guided ships through the most dangerous sectors. Human medical stations provided care in regions too remote for other species to maintain facilities. Human engineers maintained the orbital platforms that kept dozens of worlds habitable. Colonel Mitchell's display showed military deployments. All human peacekeeping forces are withdrawing immediately. The defense platforms around Nexus Station human-built and human-maintained. The patrol fleets protecting the trade routes through the Maelstrom human ships with human crews. The early warning systems that watch for incursions from dark space human technology operated by human technicians. You cannot do this. The Sarian delegate's synthesized voice rose to a shriek. The security implications alone, the trade disruptions, the humanitarian crisis. The humanitarian crisis. Elena's composure finally cracked, her voice rising with 3 centuries of suppressed anger. Where was your concern for humanity's humanitarian needs? Where was your compassion when human colonies struggled with resource shortages while sitting on the border of your empire? Where was your outrage when human refugees from the corporate wars were denied sanctuary because they might destabilize local populations? She gestured to her companions, each representing a different aspect of humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. Dr. Chen here spent 40 years developing agricultural techniques that ended famine on 17 worlds. His reward, being denied access to botanical samples that could have ended hunger on Earth's struggling colonies. Colonel Mitchell led the Alliance forces that stopped 3 different expansionist empires from carving up the galaxy. Her reward, being told that humans were too aggressive to have a permanent seat on the Security Council. The final member of the human delegation, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the galaxy's foremost expert on xenopsychology, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried clearly in the stunned silence. I have spent my entire career studying how different species think, feel, and relate to one another. I've mediated first contact protocols, designed cultural exchange programs, and helped broker peace between civilizations that couldn't even conceive of each other's existence. And through all of this, I have come to one inescapable conclusion. She paused, looking around the chamber at the thousands of alien faces watching her. This galaxy doesn't want partners. It wants servants. It doesn't want equals. It wants a species willing to do the dangerous, dirty, thankless work of maintaining civilization while accepting crumbs from the table of power in return. Dr. Tanaka's words carried the weight of absolute conviction. You have made it clear, through centuries of action and inaction, that humanity will never be accepted as true equals in this community. We will always be the hired help, useful, necessary, but never truly part of the family. Chancellor Malthrius attempted to regain control of the situation, his ancient voice carrying centuries of diplomatic experience. Surely there must be room for negotiation, for compromise. The galactic community values humanity's contributions immensely. Perhaps we could establish a committee to review. Another committee. Elena laughed, the sound bitter and tired. Another review. Another process that will take years to decide whether humans deserve the basic respect that every other species in this chamber takes for granted. She shook her head. No, Chancellor, we're done with committees. We're done with reviews. We're done with hoping that someday, somehow, the galaxy might see fit to treat us as equals. The human delegation began gathering their materials, the simple action somehow carrying immense symbolic weight. These 5 individuals were about to walk away from the greatest achievement in galactic history, the peaceful cooperation of thousands of species across hundreds of thousands of worlds. But their departure would leave a void that the remaining delegates were only beginning to comprehend. Wait. The Zephyrian delegate's wings created a frantic buzzing sound as she tried to intervene. Surely we can find a solution. The economic implications alone, human trade represents nearly 30% of all interstellar commerce. Human manufacturing capabilities are no longer your concern, Dr. Chen replied firmly. You'll need to develop your own solutions, just as you always insisted we do when we came to you for help. Colonel Mitchell's expression was stone cold as she addressed the assembly one final time. To those civilizations currently under threat from hostile forces, we regret that you will need to find new defenders. To those worlds dependent on human-maintained infrastructure, we suggest you begin developing indigenous capabilities immediately. To those who assumed human protection and human service would always be freely given, We hope you understand that assumption was gravely mistaken. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in throughout the chamber. Voices rose in a cacophony of panic, anger, and disbelief. The Andromeda delegate was frantically calculating trade route disruptions. The Outer Rim representatives were realizing their defense networks would collapse within months. Research stations across the galaxy would go dark without human maintenance. Crews, but Elena Vasquez, ambassador of humanity, was no longer listening to their concerns. She had spent her entire career listening to alien problems, alien needs, alien demands for human solutions. Today, for the first time in 3 centuries, humanity was walking away. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal from galactic affairs, the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. The Galactic Council chambers, once a symbol of interstellar cooperation, now felt more like a crisis management center as delegates struggled to address the cascading failures across their civilization. Chancellor Malthurius stood before the assembly, his ancient tree-like form showing signs of stress that hadn't been visible in centuries. Several of his branch arms had withered, and his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. The report spread before him painted a picture of a galaxy in rapid decline. Esteemed delegates, he began, his woody voice carrying less authority than it once had, I must present to you the quarterly status report on post-human galactic stability. The results are ... concerning the holographic display that materialized. Above the assembly showed a galaxy-wide map dotted with red warning indicators. What had once been a stable network of trade routes, defense positions, and research stations now looked like a patient in critical condition, with vital signs failing across multiple systems. Trade route security has deteriorated by 67%, the Chancellor continued. Without human patrol fleets, piracy incidents have increased by 340%. The frontier zones, once pacified by human peacekeeping forces, have devolved into open warfare between 17 different factions. The Thessarian delegate, Admiral Vexhar, interrupted with characteristic bluntness. The situation is far worse than mere statistics indicate. Chancellor, 3 of my empire's core systems are now under siege by raiders who would never have dared operate while human forces patrolled those sectors. My fleet is spread thin trying to cover gaps that human ships once filled effortlessly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Cromnery representative's breathing apparatus wheezed with stress as he added, Our industrial output has dropped by nearly half. Human-designed manufacturing systems are failing, and we lack the technical expertise to maintain them. Our engineers insist they need another decade to reverse engineer the processes that humans shared freely for centuries. Double quotes Dr. Veltar, the Nelthan's chief scientist, floated anxiously in her mobility sphere as she delivered even worse news. The medical crisis is reaching critical levels. 17 plague outbreaks have occurred in regions previously protected by human-operated health monitoring systems. Without access to human pharmaceutical databases and production facilities, we estimate casualty rates will exceed 200 million within the next galactic standard year. The scope of the disaster was becoming clear to everyone present. For 3 centuries, humanity had been so thoroughly integrated into galactic civilization that their sudden absence was like removing the circulatory system from a living organism. Everything was slowly dying, but perhaps most disturbing were the reports coming from the galaxy's edge, where early warning systems had gone dark. Commander Zix of the Valdorian Defense Corps delivered the news that made every delegate's equivalent of blood run cold. The deep space monitoring stations have detected massive movement in the void regions beyond our galaxy's rim, he reported, his translator struggling to convey the fear in his original language. Without human-maintained sensor networks, our detection capabilities have been reduced to less than 20% of previous levels. If hostile forces are approaching from dark space, we may not know until they're already among us. The implication was terrifying. The last major incursion from the void had nearly destroyed galactic civilization before human intervention turned the tide. Now, with humanity gone, They were essentially blind to threats that could annihilate everything they had built. Chancellor Malthrius attempted to maintain order as panic began to spread through the chamber. We must consider our options carefully. Perhaps it is time to open formal negotiations with the human government. Surely they can be made to see reason. The suggestion was met with bitter laughter from an unexpected source, Dr. Cathara, the galaxy's leading expert on human psychology and former colleague of Dr. Yuki Tanaka. The elderly Altarian had studied humanity for over a century and understood them better than perhaps any non-human in the galaxy. Chancellor, honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, I fear you still do not understand the species you have driven away. Humans do not make decisions like this lightly. Their withdrawal was not a negotiating tactic or an emotional outburst. It was the result of a careful, methodical evaluation of costs versus benefit that spanned generations. She activated her own holographic display, showing historical data about human contributions to galactic civilization. For 300 years, humanity gave freely of their resources, knowledge, and lives. They lost over 50 million people in conflicts fought on behalf of species sitting in this very chamber. They spent trillions of credits developing technologies they then shared without patent protection or licensing fees. They accepted refugee populations that other species turned away, often straining their own colonies to the breaking point. The display shifted to show the pattern of requests humanity had made over the centuries, always modest, always reasonable, always denied. And in return, they asked for very little. Observer status in key committees, access to certain research, databases, fair treatment in trade negotiations, recognition of their territorial claims. Every single request was either denied outright or buried in bureaucratic processes that lasted decades. Dr. Cathara asked for eyes fixed on the Chancellor with unwavering intensity. You want to negotiate. What exactly do you plan to offer them? The same promises you've made and broken for 3 centuries. The same committee assignments and advisory roles that carry no real authority. The same token gestures that demonstrate how little you actually value their contributions. The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. Everyone in the chamber knew that she was right. The galaxy had taken humanity's service for granted for so long that they had forgotten it was a choice, not an obligation. The Zephyrian trade representative, Lyrasa, tried a different approach. Perhaps we could offer them full membership in the Inner Council, immediate access to the ancient archives, expanded territorial recognition. Now you offer what should have been given freely centuries ago. Dr. Cathar interrupted. But only after you've lost access to human labor, human innovation, and human protection. Do you not see how this appears from their perspective? You refused to treat them as equals when they asked politely, but now that their absence threatens your comfort and security, suddenly they deserve equal treatment. The harsh truth of her words resonated through the chamber. The timing of their newfound generosity made it appear desperate and self-serving, which, of course, it was. Admiral Vexharsh stood up, his reptilian features twisted with frustration. Then what do you propose, Doctor? That we simply accept the collapse of galactic civilization, that we allow everything we've built over millennia to crumble because one species chose to abandon their responsibilities. Their responsibilities? Dr. Cathar's voice rose to a level that made several delegates step back. They had no responsibilities to us. Every action they took on our behalf was voluntary, based on their belief that they were part of a community that valued their contributions. When we made it clear that we saw them as servants rather than partners, they chose to serve themselves. Instead, she gestured to the display showing the current crisis. This collapse isn't happening because humanity abandoned their responsibilities. It's happening because we never developed our own capabilities, never built redundant systems, never prepared for the possibility that our free labor force might one day demand fair compensation. The Andromeda delegate, whose crystalline form pulsed with agitation, tried another angle. But surely they must see that their withdrawal hurts innocent populations. Millions of civilians are suffering because human medical stations have gone offline. Entire worlds may face starvation without human agricultural support systems. Dr. Cathar's expression softened slightly, but her words remained firm. You're right that innocents are suffering, but whose fault is that? Humanity begged for redundancy in critical systems. They offered to train local populations to maintain essential infrastructure. They warned repeatedly that single species dependencies were dangerous. Every offer was rejected because local governments wanted to save money, and the council wanted to maintain control. She pulled up communication records from the past century, showing dozens of formal warnings from human administrators about system vulnerabilities. They tried to prepare us for this scenario because they understood something we refused to acknowledge, that no species should be solely responsible for others' survival. That kind of dependency is unhealthy for everyone involved. The truth was becoming inescapable. Humanity hadn't abandoned the galaxy in a fit of spite or selfishness. They had spent decades trying to transition their responsibilities to local control, offering training, sharing technical specifications, even providing financial incentives for other species to develop indigenous capabilities. But it was always easier and cheaper to let the humans handle it. Chancellor Maltharius, looking every bit of his 1,000 years of age, made one final attempt at salvage. Dr. Cathara, you know humanity better than anyone. Is there truly no path back from this? No way to rebuild the relationship that has served the galaxy so well? The old Altarian was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she contemplated the question. When she finally spoke, her voice carried deep sadness. Chancellor, I have spent more than a century studying human psychology, culture, and decision-making processes. I have worked alongside human researchers, served with human peacekeepers, and called many humans my friends. So, when I tell you this, please understand that it brings me no joy. She paused, gathering herself for words that would change everything. Humanity is not coming back, not to save us from our mistakes, not to restore the systems we allowed to decay, not to rescue us from threats we should have prepared for ourselves. They have looked at this relationship and concluded correctly that it was fundamentally exploitative and unsustainable. The finality in her voice was crushing. You want to know what humanity is doing now? They're building new colonies in the regions they've claimed as their own, building defense networks to protect their people, building research institutions to advance their own knowledge, building the civilization they always should have been allowed to build, instead of spending their resources maintaining ours. She gestured to encompass the entire chamber, and they're doing it without us. Without our permission, without our oversight, without our interference. For the first time in 3 centuries, humanity is free to pursue its own destiny, and they're never going to voluntarily surrender that freedom again. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just withdrawing from galactic civilization, they were building a rival to it, with their technology, their experience, and their proven ability to innovate and adapt. They could very well surpass the older galactic powers within a few generations. As the session ended and delegates filed out, in dejected silence, many were beginning to realize the terrible irony of their situation. In their efforts to keep humanity subordinate, they had created exactly the outcome they had feared most: a human civilization that was completely independent of galactic control and had every reason to view their former partners with suspicion and resentment. The galaxy had successfully driven away the species that had held it together. Now they would discover what it was like to face the universe without their most capable protectors, innovators, and problem solvers. And somewhere in the growing darkness of space, ancient threats were stirring, drawn by the scent of a weakened civilization that had just lost its most effective defenders. 2 years had passed since humanity's withdrawal, and the galaxy's situation had deteriorated from crisis to catastrophe. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was smaller than usual. Several species representatives couldn't attend because their worlds were under siege. their communication networks had failed, or their governments had simply collapsed. The reports coming in painted a picture of accelerating decline that even the most pessimistic projections hadn't anticipated. Without human maintenance, critical infrastructure was failing faster than anyone had predicted. Without human innovation, problems that would have been quickly solved now festered into existential threats. Chancellor Malthrius looked ancient now, his wooden form bearing scars from stress that aged Valdorians weren't supposed to experience. The weight of watching galactic civilization crumble under his leadership had taken a toll that centuries of normal political challenges never had. Esteemed delegates, he began, his voice hollow with exhaustion, I regret to inform you that the situation has become untenable. The Sector 7 colonies have gone completely dark. The Kepler defense grid has collapsed, leaving 12 systems exposed to raider attacks. Most critically, we have confirmed reports of void entities penetrating our outer perimeter. The last statement sent a wave of terror through the assembled delegates. The void entities were nightmares from the galaxy's dark past, incomprehensible beings from the space between galaxies that consumed entire star systems, leaving only empty darkness behind. The last time they had appeared, it had taken the combined might of the entire galaxy, spearheaded by human military innovation, to drive them back. Admiral Vexhar, his once proud uniform now bearing the scars of constant combat, delivered the military briefing with grim professionalism. Our defense capabilities have degraded beyond any acceptable threshold. Without human-designed early warning systems, the void entities achieved complete tactical surprise. 3 systems in the outer rim have been consumed before we even knew they were under attack. He activated a holographic display showing the current military situation. Red zones marked areas under attack. Yellow zones showed regions cut off from communication, and gray zones indicated territories that had simply gone silent. The amount of gray was horrifying. Our remaining fleets are operating at perhaps 30% of their pre-withdrawal effectiveness. Human-designed ships represented 60% of our total military capacity, and we've lost most of our ability to maintain or repair their systems. Worse, the tactical doctrines that proved effective against void entities were all developed by human strategic analysts without access to their research or their expertise. We're essentially fighting blind. The Cromnery delegate's breathing apparatus was working overtime as stress hormones flooded his system. The economic situation is equally catastrophic. Interstellar trade has collapsed by 85%. Most worlds can no longer maintain the technology necessary for faster-than-light communication, much less transportation. We're seeing entire sectors reverting to pre-space flight technology levels. Dr. Veltar, the Nothin's chief scientist, floated in her mobility sphere like a creature condemned. The medical crisis has exceeded our worst projections. Without access to human pharmaceutical databases, 17 different plagues are spreading unchecked through the galaxy. The death toll, approaching 500 million and accelerating. Several species are facing potential extinction, but perhaps the most devastating report came from Dr. Cathara, the Altarian psychologist who had tried to warn them about humanity's resolve. Now she served as the Council's expert on what had become known as the human question, the desperate search for any path back to the relationship they had destroyed. Honored delegates, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of failure, I have completed my analysis of human activities since their withdrawal. The results are sobering. Her holographic display showed star charts of human-controlled space, but the picture was dramatically different from what they had expected. Instead of the modest handful of systems humanity had controlled while serving the galaxy, their territory now spanned vast regions of space that had been considered uninhabitable or worthless. Humanity has established 47 new colonies in the past 2 years, she reported. They've activated mining operations in asteroid fields we considered too dangerous to exploit. They've built manufacturing facilities in regions where the Radiation levels were thought to be fatal to all known life forms. They've tapped energy sources we didn't even know existed. The displays zoomed in to show massive construction project space habitats that dwarfed anything the older galactic civilizations had built. Shipyards producing vessels of entirely new designs. Research facilities that suggested technological advancement at a pace that defied belief. Their rate of expansion and development is unprecedented in galactic history, Dr. Cathar continued. They're not just surviving without us, they're thriving. Our intelligence suggests they've made breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light travel, energy generation, and terraforming that put them decades ahead of where they were when they left. The implications were staggering. While the rest of the galaxy struggled to maintain basic civilization without human support, humanity was advancing at a rate that would soon make them the dominant power in the local galactic region. Most concerning, the doctor added, is their attitude toward the rest of us. Based on intercepted communications and refugee reports, humanity views the current crisis entirely predictable and entirely preventable. They feel no obligation to intervene, no guilt about our suffering, and no interest in resuming their previous role, the galaxy's caretakers. Admiral Vexhar slammed his clawed hand on his desk in frustration. They cannot simply stand by and watch galactic civilization collapse. They have a moral obligation. To whom? Dr. Cathar interrupted sharply. To the species that denied them equal treatment for 3 centuries. To the governments that voted almost unanimously to reject their final reasonable request for recognition. To the civilizations that gladly accepted their protection while refusing them basic respect. She gestured to the displays, showing the expanding human territory. From their perspective, they fulfilled their moral obligations for 300 years and received nothing but exploitation in return. Now they're finally free to fulfill their obligations to their own people, and they're doing exactly that. The Zephyrian delegate, Lyrasa, made a desperate suggestion. What if we offered them complete autonomy, full membership in the Inner Council, unlimited access to all galactic resources, recognition of their territorial claims, everything they ever asked for, and more? Dr. Cathar's expression was pitying. Delegate Lyrasa, you're still thinking like a galactic bureaucrat. You believe everything has a price, that every relationship is transactional. But humanity's withdrawal wasn't about getting a better deal, it was about escaping a fundamentally toxic relationship. She pulled up historical data showing the pattern of requests and rejections that had characterized human galactic relations. Look at this from their perspective. For 3 centuries, they were the galaxy's emergency responders, protectors, and problem solvers. They did this not because they were paid to, but because they believed they were part of a community that valued their contributions. The display showed the brutal reality of that relationship: human casualties in galactic conflicts, human resources spent on galactic problems, human innovation shared freely with species that gave nothing in return. When they finally realized that the galaxy saw them as useful servants rather than valued partners, they made a strategic decision to prioritize their own people's welfare. That decision has proven to be absolutely correct. They're more prosperous, more secure, and more advanced than they ever were while serving galactic interests. Chancellor Malthrius made one last desperate plea. But surely they must see that, without their intervention, billions of innocent beings will die. The void entities alone will consume approximately 60% of current galactic civilization. Dr. Cathar finished. Yes, our projections suggest that's the most likely outcome. But here's what you're still not understanding: that's not humanity's problem anymore. The brutal calculus was inescapable. Humanity had spent 3 centuries trying to save a galactic civilization that treated them as expendable. Now that they were free of that burden, why would they choose to shoulder it again? The humans have done the math, she continued. If they intervene to save us from the void entities, they'll be expected to rebuild the galactic infrastructure, restore the trade networks, and resume their role as the galaxy's protectors. In other words, they'll be right back where they started doing all the work while being denied equal voice in decisions. She gestured to the expanding human territory. Or they can continue building their own civilization, defending their own people, and advancing their own interests. In 50 years, they'll be the dominant power in this region of space. In 100 years, they'll have expanded beyond our current reach. In 200 years, they may have developed capabilities that make our current technology look primitive. The choice, from humanity's perspective, was obvious. They could sacrifice their future to save civilizations that had never valued them, or they could secure their own destiny and let the galaxy face the consequences of its own choices. As the session ended in dejected silence, many delegates were beginning to understand the magnitude of their mistake. They hadn't just lost humanity's services, they had lost the opportunity to be part of what might become the next great galactic civilization. Outside the council chambers, emergency broadcasts were reporting new void entity incursions, the fall of another major colony world, and the complete breakdown of long-range communication networks. The galaxy was dying, and its would-be saviors were busy building something new among the stars. Humanity had walked away, and they weren't looking back. 5 years after humanity's withdrawal, the remnants of the Galactic Council met for what everyone knew would be their final session. The Great Chamber, that had once hosted thousands of delegates, now held fewer than 100 representatives from perhaps 30 surviving civilizations. The rest had either fallen to the void entities, collapsed into pre-space flight barbarism, or simply vanished into the growing darkness. Chancellor Malthrius was dying. The ancient Valdorian's tree-like form was withered and brown, his root tendrils having withdrawn from the chamber floor that had sustained him for centuries. But he had insisted on presiding over this final gathering, determined to see the end of what he had helped to build. Esteemed delegates, he said, his voice barely a whisper now, we gather today not to conduct the business of galactic civilization, but to acknowledge its end, the great experiment of interstellar cooperation, spanning millennia and encompassing thousands of worlds, is concluded. The holographic displays around the chamber told the story of complete collapse. Vast regions of space showed as gray zones, areas where no communications had been received for months or years. The void entities had consumed entire sectors, leaving behind empty space where star systems had once thrived. Other regions had simply reverted to isolated, feudal states that could barely maintain orbital infrastructure, much less participate in galactic affairs. Admiral Vexhar, now bearing the scars of countless desperate battles, delivered the final military report. His once proud fleet had been reduced to a handful of ships, and his empire had shrunk to a single star system under siege. Military operations have ceased in all sectors, he reported, his voice hollow with defeat. Our remaining forces lack the fuel, ammunition, and maintenance capabilities to continue organized resistance. The void entities now control approximately 70% of previously inhabited galactic space. The remaining 30% is divided between human territory, isolated survivor enclaves, and regions we simply cannot contact. The scope of the disaster was unprecedented in galactic history. Civilizations that had endured for tens of thousands of years had been reduced to scattered refugees in the span of half a decade. The great trade networks that had connected distant worlds were broken beyond repair. The accumulated knowledge of millennia was being lost as libraries burned and databases went offline. But perhaps most bitter was the knowledge that it had all been preventable. Dr. Cathara, now the lone survivor of her species after the Altarian homeworld fell to the void, delivered the final analysis that everyone had been dreading to hear. The human response to our collapse has been illuminating, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a civilization's death. They have monitored our situation closely, not out of concern for our welfare, but as a strategic intelligence gathering operation. They wanted to understand exactly how their former responsibilities would unfold without their intervention. Her holographic display showed intercepted human communications and intelligence reports. The data painted a picture of a species that had not only anticipated the galaxy's collapse, but had planned for it with ruthless precision. Humanity has used the past 5 years to consolidate their position as the dominant power in this galactic region. While we fought desperately to maintain basic civilization, they have expanded their territory, advanced their technology, and prepared for the galaxy that will emerge from this collapse. The display showed human fleet movements, not random expansion, but carefully planned operations that secured key strategic resources, defensible positions, and surviving populations that possessed useful skills or knowledge. They weren't conquering in the traditional sense, but they were certainly not allowing valuable assets to be consumed by the void or lost to chaos. Most significantly, Dr. Cathar continued, they have begun accepting refugees, but only under very specific conditions. Individuals with advanced technical skills, researchers with unique knowledge, and populations willing to fully integrate into human civilization being granted sanctuary. Everyone else is left to face the consequences of our collective failure. The implications were clear. Humanity was cherry-picking the best and brightest from the collapse, while allowing the governments and institutions that had rejected them to perish. It was a form of justice that was both perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. The Cromnery delegate wheezed through his failing breathing apparatus as he asked the question that haunted them all. Have they responded to any of our requests for assistance, even the most desperate pleas? Dr. Cathar's expression was grim. The human government has issued only one official statement regarding the galactic crisis. I will read it in full, as it represents their final word. On the matter, she activated a recording, and the familiar voice of Ambassador Elena Vasquez filled the chamber. But this was not the woman who had served galactic interests for decades. This was the voice of someone who had watched her people's generosity, repaid with contempt, and had learned from that experience. To the former members of the Galactic Council, the recording began. Humanity acknowledges the current crisis facing galactic civilization. We note with regret, but without surprise, that the systems we warned were unsustainable have indeed collapsed when subjected to stress. We observe that the dependencies we cautioned against have proven fatal when the supporting infrastructure was removed. The words were delivered with diplomatic precision, but their meaning was brutal. Humanity had predicted exactly this scenario and had been ignored. The human government wishes to make clear that we bear no responsibility for the current situation. We offered our services as equals and partners, and were rejected. We attempted to establish redundant systems and transfer critical knowledge, and were rebuffed. We warned of the dangers of single-species dependencies, and were dismissed. The recording continued with devastating clinical detachment. We further note that the same galactic institutions that deemed humanity too young to participate in governance decisions, too aggressive to hold security positions, and too presumptuous to request equal treatment, now characterize our current non-interference as a moral failing. This contradiction suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of voluntary cooperation. Ambassador Vasquez's voice carried a note of finality that made every delegate in the chamber understand that this was not the beginning of negotiations, but the end of a relationship. Humanity has moved beyond the galactic community that rejected us. We are building something new, something better, something that will not repeat the mistakes that led to the current crisis. We wish the survivors of the old order well, but we will not sacrifice our future to preserve your past. The recording ended, leaving the chamber in absolute silence. The message was clear. Humanity was not coming to save them. Not now, not ever. Chancellor Malthurius gathered his remaining strength for one final act of leadership. Then it falls to us to acknowledge what we have lost through our own choices. The galactic community, as we knew it, is ended. Those who survive will need to find new ways to live, new alliances to build, new hopes to sustain them. He paused, his ancient eyes taking in the faces of the delegates who had been his colleagues for so many years. But let us not delude ourselves about what happened here. We did not lose humanity to some natural disaster or unavoidable tragedy. We drove them away through our own arrogance, our own prejudice, our own inability to recognize that service freely given could not be demanded indefinitely. The old Valdorian's voice grew stronger as he delivered his final judgment. History will record that galactic civilization fell not because it was conquered by external enemies, but because it could not learn to treat its greatest contributors as equals. We had the galaxy's most capable species as our partners, and we chose to treat them as our servants. We had the opportunity to build something magnificent together, and we chose to preserve our own petty privileges instead. As the session formally ended and the delegates prepared to return to their dying worlds, Dr. Cathar made one final observation that would haunt the survivors for generations to come. The greatest tragedy, she said to the nearly empty chamber, is not that we failed to appreciate humanity's contributions. It's that we failed to learn from their example. For 3 centuries, we watched them demonstrate that the strong should protect the weak, that knowledge should be shared freely, that cooperation served everyone's interests better than competition. She gestured to the displays, showing the expanding human territory, where millions of refugees from dozens of species were beginning new lives under human protection. They offered to teach us how to build a better galaxy. Instead, we taught them that their generosity would never be reciprocated, so they stopped being generous to us and started being generous to themselves. The final truth was inescapable. Humanity hadn't abandoned galactic civilization had abandoned humanity first. The current crisis was not the result of human selfishness, but the inevitable consequence of a system that had taken its best contributors for granted for far too long. As the great chamber powered down for the final time, its lights dimming, to conserve energy that would be needed for basic life support, the end of an era was complete. The galaxy that had once been home to thousands of civilizations working together in harmony was now a collection of isolated survivors, struggling to maintain even the basic necessities of life. But somewhere in the darkness of space, humanity's lights were growing brighter. They were building the galaxy they had always dreamed of, one where contribution was rewarded, where service was valued, where the strong protected the weak not out of obligation, but out of genuine partnership. The old galaxy was dying, the new galaxy was being born, and humanity, the species that had once served everyone else's interests, was finally free to serve their own. 50 years after the fall of the Galactic Council, Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled delegates of the human commonwealth, her great-granddaughter by her side. The chamber was built into a massive space station orbiting the binary stars of the Kepler system, its transparent walls offering a breathtaking view of the thriving human civilization that had emerged from the ashes of the old galaxy. Elena was ancient now, her body kept alive by medical technology that had advanced far beyond anything the old galactic civilization had achieved. But her mind remained sharp, and her memory of the old days was perfect. She had insisted on living long enough to see this moment, the formal establishment of the Commonwealth that would govern humanity's expansion into the next century. 50 years ago, she began, her voice still carrying the authority that had once addressed the Galactic Council. Humanity walked away from a galaxy that saw us as servants rather than partners. Today, we gather to establish a government that will ensure such a relationship never develops again. The delegates before her represented over 300 human worlds, dozens of allied species that had chosen to join human civilization, and the survivors of the old galactic order who had earned their place through service rather than inheritance. It was a government built on the principles that the old Galactic Council had rejected: merit, contribution, and mutual respect. The Commonwealth Charter, Elena continued, is based on simple principles that should have been obvious to anyone who studied history. Power must be earned through service. Authority must be justified by results. No species, no matter how old or proud, has the right to rule others simply because they existed first. The charter that the delegates would vote represented everything humanity had learned from their centuries of service to an ungrateful galaxy. It established clear requirements for membership, mandatory contributions to common defense, and rotation of leadership positions based on demonstrated capability rather than political connections. But perhaps most importantly, it included provisions that would prevent any single species from becoming indispensable to the others. Critical infrastructure would be maintained by multiple species. Key technologies would be shared openly. Essential services would have redundant backup systems operated by different governments. We will not repeat the mistakes of the old galaxy, Elena declared. We will not allow ourselves to become indispensable, and we will not allow others to become dependent on our generosity. The Commonwealth will be a partnership of equals, or will not exist at all. The vote was unanimous. The human Commonwealth was formally established. With Elena Vasquez as its first Secretary General, position she would hold for exactly one term before mandatory rotation to a representative of another species. As the ceremony concluded, Elena stood at the great windows of the station, looking out at the ships and habitats that filled the space around them. The old galaxy was still there, still struggling to rebuild from the collapse that had claimed so many civilizations. But it was no longer humanity's concern. The Commonwealth controlled nearly a third of the galaxy now, with the most advanced technology, the strongest military, and the most prosperous economy in known space. They had become what the old Galactic Council had feared, a human-dominated civilization that could challenge anyone in the galaxy. But they had also become something the old council had never imagined, a civilization that actually deserved to be dominant because it had earned that position through service, sacrifice, and genuine partnership with others. Elena's great-granddaughter, Sarah, joined her at the window. She was young, brilliant, and had never known a galaxy where humans were treated as anything less than equals. To her, the old stories of humanity's servitude seemed like ancient history. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Walking away from them, I mean, letting so many civilizations fall." Elena was quiet for a long moment, remembering the faces of the delegates who had voted against humanity's final, reasonable request for equal treatment. She thought of the billions who had died in the collapse, the civilizations that had vanished, the knowledge that had been lost. "I regret that it was necessary," she finally said. "I regret that they chose pride over survival, that they chose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. But I don't regret the choice we made. We tried to save them from themselves for 3 centuries, and they rejected every attempt. At some point, you have to choose between your own future and their past." She gestured to the thriving civilization around them. "Look what we've built, Sarah. Look what we've accomplished when we were finally free to serve our own interests instead of everyone else's. This is what we could have built together, if they had been willing to treat us as partners, instead of servants." The irony was not lost on her. The galaxy had rejected humanity's partnership when it was freely offered, and now humanity was so far advanced that partnership was no longer possible. The old civilizations were client states at best, wards of the Commonwealth who survived on human charity and protection. "The greatest tragedy," Elena said, echoing words she had heard long ago, "is not that we failed to save them. It's that they failed to save themselves. We showed them the way for 3 centuries, and they chose to ignore the lesson." As the binary stars set behind the space station, casting long shadows across the Commonwealth fleet, Elena felt a deep satisfaction. Humanity had finally found its place in the galaxy, not as the servants of others, but as the masters of their own destiny. The old galaxy was dead. The new galaxy was human, and for the first time in centuries, that felt exactly right. Final note: this is the story of what happens when a species gives everything and receives nothing in return. For 3 centuries, humanity served as the galaxy's emergency responders, protectors, and problem solvers, asking only to be treated as equals in the civilization they helped to build and defend. When that basic respect was denied, humanity made the hardest choice possible they chose themselves over everyone else. They walked away from their responsibilities, leaving the galaxy to face the consequences of its own failures. The old galactic civilization fell not because it was conquered, but because it had become dependent on the generosity of a species it refused to respect. When that generosity was withdrawn, the entire system collapsed like a house of cards. Humanity didn't abandon the galaxy out of spite or selfishness. They abandoned it out of self-respect, refusing to continue a relationship that had become exploitative and one-sided. In doing so, they saved themselves and built something better from the ashes of what was lost. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to find your way home.